What's up, guys? Harley here with MitsuTimes, sitting down with Circle D Converters, and this is Pete.
How's it going, guys?
No, how are you, Pete?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good, brother. So we're here to talk really simple stuff. Let's talk how a torque converter works.
Sure. So a torque converter is a fluid coupling device housed between the engine and transmission, and it utilizes fluid to transmit the engine crankshaft power to the transmission input shaft, and it does that through a three-piece assembly. Here we have an example. We have the impeller, also known as the pump. We have the stator, which is the intermediate component that's housed between the impeller and the turbine. And then, of course, we have the turbine here. This is the component that's actually splined to your transmission input shaft. And on a basic level, what's going on inside a converter, an easy visual that works for a lot of people is to imagine that you have two box fans facing each other, and you turn one fan on, and the airflow from that active fan starts the blades turning of the fan that's off. Kind of the same things going on in the converter. We have the impeller creating fluid motion as it's spinning. This converter's charged full of oil in a running condition, and that fluid motion induces the turbine to start spinning. And because the turbine is splined to your input shaft, it makes the transmission input shaft spin, creates your drive energy to the transmission. As that fluid is transmitting from your impeller to your turbine, it flows through the blades inside the turbine and is then redirected by the stator. So that fluid passes through in a loop cycle from pump, turbine, stator, discharges from the stator back to the pump, and creates drive energy on these inner pump blades. So the stator is essentially an energy recovery device inside the torque converter. And when it comes to stall speed, there's a number of ways that you can manipulate that. We can change the angle of the blades in the impeller, and then we can also change the stator design as far as the blade count, the blade shape, and we can basically make the converter do whatever you need it to do to best match the torque curve characteristics of your engine.
I'm not going to lie, Pete. You just hit me with one of those I dazed off because that was so informative, and I was genuinely curious on how most of that worked that I was like, yeah, I was right there with you. So I tried to simplify it before we got here. It's kind of like a turbo. Fluid goes in here, and witchcraft happens.
Yeah, basically. That's the long and short of it.
So there you have it. And can we talk about the basics of maybe installing the torque converter?
Yeah, so when you're installing a converter, it's always a good idea to go ahead and prime the converter with a little bit of transmission fluid. You don't have to fill it completely full, but a half a quart to a quart of fluid is usually sufficient, and that just kind of helps pre-lube the bearings and make sure that everything is good to go so you don't have a dry startup condition. When you have the converter seated into the transmission, you're seating it into three components. You're seating it into the transmission pump gear, which is your pump hub right here. You have a splined component in your stator, so that's engaging the larger spline tube sticking out of your transmission pump. And then, of course, in the turbine, we have the smaller spline that's engaging your transmission input shaft. So typically when you're installing, a lot of times you can detect three clunks or clicks as you're kind of walking it around and getting it to fully seat into the transmission. If you don't get it fully seated in the pump, like if your pump hub isn't engaged into your pump gear and then you just go and bolt everything together, you're typically going to break the pump gear in the transmission, and then you're pulling everything back apart, and it's an expensive repair. Normally when the converter is fully seated into the transmission, you're going to see a little bit of an air gap between the mounting pads here on the converter face and your flex plate. And the typical air gap that you're going to see, and this is kind of universally true for most automatic transmissions, is anywhere from around an 1/8 inch to 3/16 of an inch. So if you have that much air gap between the pads and the flex plate, you have the converter fully seated. Then you can go and just slide it forward and install the attaching hardware, and you're good to go.
Money. I'm a fan. So do you dare take this trip with me, Pete?
Yes.
I'm going to ask.
Do it.
Do we have any type of a timeline or guesstimation on when the Mitsubishi version of this converter will be ready?
Yes, I know it's been a big disappointment. A lot of people are excited about it. People have obviously put money down on their pre-orders, and we're trying to be sensitive to that. We feel bad just sitting on people's money and not delivering a product, but it's proven to be a lot larger engineering project than we ever originally anticipated. Primarily because of the 1G converter. It's such a shorter height than the 2G that we've had to experiment with some different cores to try and get the heights dialed in so that we can bring an actual 1G converter to market like we originally intended to satisfy the whole demographic.
So am I understanding that you guys were trying to make it maybe modular? So if they did have a 1G and they switched over to a 2G, they just kind of switched the back?
Yeah, and that's still our end goal. So our goal is to use the same pump, same stator, same turbine parts, and just have two different front covers. So that way a customer who maybe is a 1G user and wants to go 2G, they can just change the front cover instead of having to start over with a whole new converter. Or vice versa, they can go backwards from a 2G to a 1G. As far as release date, we originally were hoping for summer 2024. That obviously didn't happen. We projected December. We missed that date as well. The biggest problem is that we had two other converter projects underway before we ever even had the DSM on the table. And those took months and months longer for development to get finished, which then pushed the DSM further back. And I know it sounds like typical manufacturer excuses, but it's part of doing business, and it sucks for everybody.
I mean, I have no judgment. I mean, of course, right now we feel limited on torque converter options,
Right.
and we're genuinely looking forward to this.
Right.
But we also want it to be right when it comes out, just like you guys. So
100%. So the last communication blast that I sent out, we're targeting summer 2025. We are trying to hit, that June, July area.
Okay.
Again, don't want to mislead anybody, don't want to let anybody down any more than we have, but we are trying, and we do intend to fulfill the project.
It'll be worth the wait, y'all. I promise that. Well, Pete, I got to say, thank you, dude.
Thank you.